Ooh.
So today's topic is going to be on shame, and I wanted to reference the specific example, but others B-stars, and basically around how anime for me, and I think I'm always upping anime because anime for me has kind of reworked my notion of shame in terms of just like everything, in terms of identity, in terms of the way I think about other people, in terms of sexuality, in terms of like all of those arenas. And I think B-stars is one of them because B-stars is for context, spoiler, whatever. Um, it's basically about like a bunch of animals who are like we're like in an animal world, and there's a difference between what's it carnivores and what's the other one?
Carnivores and herbivores.
Yeah, I don't,
They're the
girl.
ones that just
You
eat
into science, me.
vegetables. Herbivores.
The people who eat plants and the people who eat meat.
Yeah.
Like a difference, right, in animals, and they usually keep them separate because they can eat them. They and the rule of the school or like the area they live in is like you can't eat meat because it keeps peace. And the basis of the story that makes it is where the two, it's kind of like a Romeo and Juliet kind of like they fall in love. Like this big bad werewolf who ate a human the first episode is in love with this petite, carrot eating rabbit, and how people would be against that because that shouldn't happen. So that's basically the basis of the plot. But the fact that just in general, I would consider an adult show. Like it's an adult, like you have to be at least a teenager, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And you basically see a rabbit having sex with a werewolf very sensationally.
just lots of things going on there.
And I like you expressing it, and I love to hear you. I remember like I heard of this and people were saying it's such a good storyline, which it is. The anime is bomb. Like it rocks. But like the idea of watching like animals in this way, it feels like bestiality. Like I feel shameful watching it. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember the first time when I watched it, which was like a while back. My friend had recommended it to me because he was like, "Yeah, it's like a really good show, but also cautious. It's a little weird. So just know it's weird and go into it knowing that." And I was like, "Oh, okay, like all right." I clicked it. I was like, "Oh, this is like some furry shit. Like like the people that dress up as furries and like." I was like, "Oh, this I don't know." And then we had the bunny who was off rip like on the third episode was like, "Do you want me to like basically like?"
Poco.
And I was like, and I was like, how? And I was really sitting there. I had to pause. I had to pause the screen because I was just like, do I continue this show? Even though like this is giving me big furry bestiality vibes, and I feel really ashamed that I'm watching this show right now. And I continued it, but it was just the constant shame whenever like sex was introduced between the characters was just like it was always there, and I was always like, oh, is this bestiality? Like, what does this mean that I'm watching it? Um, and trying to sort through that was also really interesting for me. Ultimately, I was like, this means nothing. Like, I'm not into no beast shit, but the storyline is really, really, really good. And so a part of it was like thinking about what do these characters bring now that they are animals as opposed to human characters, and like why was that a conscious decision to make instead of having human characters, and what does that bring to the anime itself? Because obviously it was a very intentional decision to have these characters be animals and not humans. And so that's kind of what I thought about also when I was trying to process like the shame of watching this. Was also, okay, but there's more to this than just being animals.
Poco.
I'm not just watching animals.
Poco.
Have relationships and meaningful connections with one another, and the reason that there's a reason that they are animals and not humans, and the topics that they're trying to cover makes it adds more to the conversation at hand, if that makes sense.
absolutely, and I think this notion of shame is so interesting. I'm actually reading this book, the Red Table Talk, Red Table Talk on Facebook with Jada Pickens. Had this one episode on shame, and they had like this doctor who studied shame, and I actually bought her book because of the Red Table Talk, and I'll link it for people to watch. But shame is such an interesting emotion or experience, and I think that the thing about shame is interesting because we try to, swipe it on the rug. It's always in the dark. We can't put it to the light, and I think that first and foremost, let me just get this out the way. And I think we talked about this the first episode we ever did this kind of like anime talk series, where if you look at the way anime has been developed historically since like the 80s and 70s, 80s, 90s, and into the 2000s, especially when it's a shonen kind of action kind of anime, they're obviously targeting a particular audience. It's like, what, 14-year-old to like 17, 15-year-old boys, like teenage horny pubescent boys. So they're going to cater to an audience, let's be honest. And if we're going to be honest, it's weird, but the reality is it's like a bunch of older men who are making these animations, and it's like with gravity defying boobs that do not, unless you have surgery. Some surgery can do that for you, but I've never seen some real tits just smack me across the face just because she walked past by me. That is just unreal, right? But I thought, yes, there is like this, and not even, I think I want to also challenge my idea of that we would assume, oh, like, why would you watch that? It's pervy, da-da-da. And to an extent, it's like you are sexualizing women. However, it's like, I want to challenge that notion, right, of the sex. And granted, we could think about, like, who's creating this and why they're creating this, and how this kind of perpetuates this sexualization of women and that kind of concern. I want to get out the way, like, we understand that. If you don't understand that, then get off this video and go read some books. You can look it up on Google. I don't have time to be teaching people. We're just talking about anime, and that's that. We're asking questions and we're challenging ourselves. So I want to just get that out the way. And I think that the second thing I want to get out the way, not get out the way, but I think this is how you know it's a good show. Because, or you are a good artist, you're able to replicate something. If you're able to replicate certain notions about like metaphysical, like in a way, like racism, differences, like systematic oppression, love, romance, death, the whole idea of food chains and like eating people and like not eating people, you know what I mean? Like the whole werewolf rabbit thing. Like if you're able to replicate these metaphysical ideas or concepts into whether it's humans, whether it's animals, whether it's robots, I think there's something telling about a connectivity of how we view ourselves and what we are in search of when it comes to our life purpose, etc. All that philosophical stuff we're always thinking about, people, take drugs for. So there's that. And I think that, generally speaking, when it comes to like the sexualization part, for me, I find it a note when I watch like Beastars, or I think of like other like weird ass anime that's definitely problematic. It's like Prison School, for example. It's like, so just for context synopsis, it's basically like an all-girls school, and apparently there are like only 4 boys for some reason, and if they do anything perverted, they go to like a prison, but like they just always end up in very pervy kind of situations. It's like a very pervy, definitely don't watch in public kind of anime. There's actually a guy, a YouTuber, who makes a series on animes you shouldn't watch in public. He talks about them. They're so weird, but I think I want to challenge that because I think that's something says about me and how I'm judgmental and how I have these very heteronormative, very, I think that there's something telling about desire and how we look at our expansiveness to a very, quote unquote, the saying is vanilla sex, and how we often assume that should be the norm. That's not even just the norm, but it's what you should be doing. And I think that when we watch something like Beastars, it's, if you're open to it and you're watching it, it shifts your notion of what you should be doing. It shifts your heteronormativity, and I think in a way that anime does in general. Like I think just looking at the way we look at sex and the way we, like, why can't I think it's problematic to say, but I think, I don't know, I'm trying to challenge myself in how I view sex and desire. And it's like, why can't you be in love with a robot? Like, why is that considered a taboo? And I think that anime is a great world to explore these concepts and conversations of desire and how we view sex. I think I've always mentioned like the book Pleasure Activism, or recently an author named Angela Chen uh, has a book on asexuality, what teaches you about desire. Like, desire is such an expansive thing, and we see sexuality as such a binary, like, it's just an identifier, this is who you are. You know, it is like, I think sexuality is a spectrum. There's so many things we can uncover, and it honestly doesn't involve humans all the time. It's for me, I think it's more metaphysical. I don't know, I'm going in circles here, but you know what I'm trying to say?
No, I definitely know what you're trying to say. I think that for Beastars, I think the shame of it is very intentional in how it's used for the anime. Like, I do think like the shame that the audience is meant to feel is supposed to like parallel the shame that the characters feel as they're trying to navigate like the own restrictions of their own sexuality as well. And so I think that that is also a part of experiencing Beastars, and that also represents the fact that like desire is not solely human experience. It's also just a sentient experience, and it's not only in sex. Desire exists outside of sex, and so um, while we may not understand it in the animal world, that does exist. It does take place, and that happens. And I think that's kind of like what you're getting at is like desire is just, it's more than just sex, and it's outside of that realm. And so when we experience it, when we see it not just in the bedroom or in very specific settings, it's off-putting, because like you're just like, no, like this is reserved for a certain time in a certain space doing certain things. And it's just like when you see it, especially when it's like in a cartoon, like that is also different, like to get over that hump as well, because that is also a large part of being an anime like watcher, is getting over the fact that now you're watching everything, all these human experiences in cartoon form. And a lot of them have very adult themes. And it's not exploring just little kid stuff, which I think is something that we often associate with cartoons. It's just like children stuff. And so that is also a large part of anime, and like the shame that sometimes comes with watching anime as an anime person is like, oh, you're an adult watching cartoons. And that's also sometimes I think that people, especially in the past before anime became like this big huge thing that people watch and people were talking about over the internet, it was like, oh, you watch anime, like, you know, there was this whole shame that was kind of around it where people didn't really talk about it unless like you knew for sure that this other person watched anime too. So I think that shame exists around just being an anime watcher in general, being a lover of anime in general, because of the certain restrictions we put on watching cartoons, and also the type of subjects that also exist within anime. And I think cartoons, in a weird way, like I'm like have allowed people to explore like different realms of desire and also different adult themes in so many and expansive ways that we haven't been able to do in like movies and regular action, real life based media. So yeah, it's this like give and take kind of like the shame, but also it's expansive in how it's able to kind of obliterate that shame once you're able to actually enter the universe of like anime.
No, yeah. And literally, like, what you just did was like, because you basically connected like multiple things that I didn't even think about, like to connect the idea of like Beastars in itself. And I had a few examples I want to point out, but like I was explaining about too about just watching anime in general as quote unquote an adult. And I heard this opinion from someone else last week about, oh, watching anime there's an automatic disconnect because it's 2D and not real D. And when he said that, I was so shocked because I've never felt that. Like when I watch anime, I've never felt like, oh, this is 2D, it's fake. I've always felt when it's a good anime, uh, immersed. And for me, watching an anime is no different than watching like a live action show. And to be honest with you, for me, I prefer anime over it. And I want to express, I don't think it was a shame. It's more so I was just in a different period in my life. But like, I first started watching anime when I was like 1 or 2, and it was Pokemon, my first anime I've ever watched. And I've just always been the cartoon animation world. Toonami Kid, you know, to the day I die. Really want to switch from Toonami. So there's that. But I would say like between like late high school when I was trying to get into college and college, I really didn't watch a lot of anime, but part because college is just traumatic. Cover. We were in the same college shirt. But a part of it, I think, and until recently too, like when I also like after college when I moved away and I was living on my own, a part of me felt I want to say shame, but like I did feel some type of way because like, oh, I should be doing certain things to be an adult. That means not watching anime. That means, you know, you have to go on dates. You have to like get an apartment. Like there's just certain things you feel obligated to check the boxes, and one of them is kind of like getting away from the things and kind of putting yourself in a box. And I think when you go, and then when I, you know, kind of like rediscovered myself, I was like, oh, let me go back to my childhood. Let me go back to what I love to do. And that's like to draw, to watch anime, to do these kind of things. It kind of reminded me how like, why I like anime in the first place. It expands my mind. It challenges me. While in there, sometimes I watch anime and I freaking hate it. I feel attacked. I feel offended many, many times. But I think that's what's so great about anime. And I feel like, and I think a perfect example is the scene in Beastars. Also, we're on talking about season 1, not season 2. I don't think season 2 came out, but I haven't watched season 2. When they're in the meat shop, like they're on a school field trip and they walk away to it. So like in Beastars, no one eats meat. That's like a thing. Like you're a good carnivore. The people who eat meat, whatever the animals would eat. If you don't eat meat, but obviously they need meat. Like that's just they'll die. The vegans are gonna come in like that's not true. But there's a whole episode on them going to the black market where they sell meat for carnivores to eat. So that's a whole thing. And like this around the shame of just even being in that space, I want us to elaborate on that particular scene of just, and it's not even about sex, it's about like going to a place you shouldn't be, doing things you shouldn't or shouldn't do. And it's just like, first and foremost, who's giving these rules? And why are these rules here? Granted, of course, disclaimer, there's obviously extreme cases, people, you know, are crazy and do crazy things, but we're talking about anime and just the concept of shame, you know, want to be sensitive to folks. But it's just like all of these things about like, if you want to eat some meat, then go eat some meat. If you don't, you don't. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that it's like there's a bunch of like, I think of like, okay, I'm just like extreme, but we can please go into the example and don't talk about this. But I think of there's this documentary I saw about, I think it's like in Oregon or like Utah, one of those places, where they have like a facility for people who are addicted to drugs. And it's not like the thing about like drug addiction they were saying, it's like in the documentary, this is not me saying this, where like they assume like once you're addicted to drugs, you can just immediately get off it, and you know, and it will work out fine, you know, if you're just clean. Like, no, there's relapses. Like, people go back to those kind of things. And there's this one facility, and I think it's only one in the country, where they help, like, you get to have the drugs, but in doses. So they won't be, like, killing. I don't want to say this, but, like, it's a facility where they sleep and get shelter and food and everything. And, like, if they're, like, an alcoholic or whatever, like, they'll give them a beer, like, but they have a certain cap on the beer depending on the person. So, like, they can wean off of it instead of just completely getting off of it. I don't know if that makes sense. I just thought of that example, but yeah.
Yeah, that made me think of a lot of things, honestly. I think that there are lots of different prescribed norms and regulations to like what people do and what is deemed acceptable, especially for certain social identities, and like that is age or, you know, race or just any of the identities at all, which I think is definitely a part of Beastar, which you see explored is based on identities. There are certain norms and expectations, regulations that are imposed on these identities for various reasons that they believe will help form a better society and make things run smoother. Whether or not that's the case is to be disputed and to be explored in the anime. And I think that that's the case in real life. It's just, we're seen in different ways. It's not a herbivore, somebody eating somebody else. It's it's in, what's acceptable behavior, what's acceptable to watch at what age, what's acceptable to do at what age, what's acceptable to be, how do we act in certain social situations. And even in the example that you brought up, like what's acceptable, ways of recovery. So I was watching Demi Lovato's YouTube documentary on her own experience, and she's saying now that she's not completely sober. Like she doesn't not engage in drugs. She actually does smoke weed from time to time, as opposed to, and sometimes has a drink or so, I think, too. And how that can't be the case for everyone, but that does work for her, and how that's such a different model than what she was exposed to prior to. And so it did take a lot to be comfortable having that conversation and talking to people and saying, no, like I'm actually not completely sober, but that's okay. And that actually is the path that works for me in my journey right now. And that's really powerful, because I think, especially like when we're exposed to drugs, it's either like you don't do that shit at all, or you do it. And that's even the way like it's taught in schools. It's like, don't do weed, kids. That's the gateway drug. If you start, yeah, you know, like they come in and they're just like, no, don't touch any of that, like at all. And like, and obviously that's not possible for a lot of people. And that's not the experience a lot of people have. And so when it's this all or nothing thing, it makes it really hard for people to find balance in between, because that's the way it's set up. And people are not allowed to explore the in-between ranges of life and are only meant to live in extremes. And so that puts an unnecessary regulation that ends up harming a lot of people, especially in their recovery period, where there's lots of pressure. For her, in her experience, when she initially was trying to be sober, she was very strictly regulated in everything, like her food intake. People on tour with her weren't allowed to bring drugs or drink alcohol or eat certain things around her. It was very much nothing, you know, around her. And she said how that ultimately affected her and her relapsing and going back into drugs. So I think that shame is meant is very much a personal experience, but also a social experience, where a lot of shame is caused by what society thinks is correct, what other people think is correct, how other people might view you. And it's done intentionally, like, and shame is used intentionally a lot of the times to regulate people. And that shame can also harm people and their ways of existence and being and knowing of themselves, trying to experience themselves. It can, living in shame ultimately makes people not know themselves sometimes, and can ultimately hurt them in ways that we just sometimes we don't think about all the time.
And you said that along the lines like they can't experience in between, but the thing is that we are in the in between, and I find it so hard to express to people, and that's why I gotta stay to myself and just stay in my room. But I feel like for me, like everything, and as I get older, it gets stronger and reaffirmed more and more. But I feel like everything is always connected. Like I believe that everything exists at the same time. Like I'm always happy and sad. Like it's never like, and I think that we live in such a binary world because we assume that people like simplicity, like it's either yes or no, it's black and white. And I think like I get the whole yes or no, like do you want food, yes or no. Sometimes I don't know, I really don't know, like I kind of would like to eat some food. If it's really good I might be into it, but right now I can wait a couple hours maybe. Like I think we find that kind of complication so complicated, but like, or we get frustrated over it, because it's not necessarily because it's complicated, but because often it's a sense of control. They're saying something that you have no control over, so now you have an issue with it, not necessarily because it's complicated. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I just feel like this darkness that we're always living in, we're putting in shame of karma and everything is, and I don't think the answer, personally, I hate when people like, oh, let's normalize. No, I don't like the whole normalizing situation. Let's define moralism. I think it's like, it's a matter of existence, like, and not just existing but thriving, not surviving but thriving kind of situation, like just understanding how all of these things come together and how we live our lives. And I think with Beastars, or like just watching like or even just like watching like prison school, or even You had mentioned before we started recording, like, we talked a little bit about High Invasion. I'm gonna start
Yeah,
watching.
was High Rise Invasion. Yeah, I was watching High Rise Invasion. High Rise Invasion is very like from the outside could seem very pervy because they're always talking about somebody's panties, like the women always showing their panties, always having the boobs out, defying gravity. Um, it's very much a part of it. And I think I felt at first I was like, yeah, you can definitely see the perviness in it. And at first it was very like off-putting to me, but I kept watching and I didn't really feel the shame of it until like my brother came and he was like, what are you watching? Like, it looks like it's like a kid's show. And my brother's 9. So like, and obviously I'm like, this is rated MA. This is not for you. And so I think I did feel a little ashamed of watching that anime in that moment, especially because it was just like, oh, like here's my little brother, you know, he thinks cartoons is supposed to be for kids, and anime definitely challenges that, which is why I brought up, you know, the ways in which anime is for kids and also has expanded and is for adults too. And there are these two planes of like anime, and they both exist, and they're both amazing experiences to be a part of. Um, but I think that these different shows, especially the ways in which they do use like sexuality, um, does really expand the way I think about sex, um, what that means, desire, who that can be between, and how that can be experienced. Um, Definitely. And I think that you can see that exploration of anime and sex in the ways that, you know, hentai has become a popular exploration on like Pornhub and shit. Like people want to watch, you know, anime characters have sex like now. Like that's definitely a huge, like that's a huge kink for people now, exploring that and that shame of it. And I think that sex in general is supposed to be shameful. So to have that on certain platforms, you're just kind of taken aback because you believe that these things are for certain settings.
I sound like one of these annoying like internet people, but I feel like we've made sex because of capitalism. We've made sex economic. Like it's like for women, it's like reproduction. Like it's a purpose. You have to reproduce kids for population control. It's not necessarily for pleasure. And same thing for men. It's like sex. Like it's this constant like kind of power control, economic transactional experience. And maybe this is me being like, you know, wuku duku duku. It's just like sex is like it can be it's beyond another. It could be within yourself, you know what I'm saying? I feel like it's a spiritual experience, like, or just an awakening. And I'm not saying like, you know, masturbation either. I'm just saying literally just understanding desire, attraction, this understanding like even just like like I really recommend people read Pleasure Activism or just even for me, like I don't identify as, I'm sorry for the motorcycle sounds, they're making me crazy, like so. But like for example, I don't identify as queer, like I don't identify as queer, I'm not. However, I freaking love queer theory. Like I think that queer theory or just queerness should be taught across like children, because there's something about queerness outside of sexuality that's expansive, that really brings something out of us in terms of how we think and look at people and look at just environments and how we interact. And I think that I don't want to get too heavy and academic in this video, but it's just like there's something about queer theory that like I just look at things so differently. I look at art differently, and this has to do with the actual physical act of sex. And I think with anime specifically, there's something, and I think it's interesting because it's like I'm no expert on Japanese culture. Like I bought a book on history of Japan because I actually want to know a little bit like the context of certain things. But like I haven't read that book yet, so I just feel like I don't know necessarily the historically like the notions of sex when it comes to Japan. I know they've obviously changed over time since, you know, America did come in, you know, certain wars had happened or whatever, not or whatever, you know what I mean. So I just feel like it's interesting to see a different part of the world depict sex through a particular kind of medium. And I think basically it's like, why am I so quick to be very excited and hyped and not view, personally me, my personal opinion, like I love watching Megan Thee Stallion, you know, movie or Cardi B WAP or whatever. And I'm like, for me personally, I'm just like, it's, you know, let them be. Like they want to do that, they do that. Like it doesn't feel for me. I personally don't see it as sexual because I'm not. That's not my intention when I'm watching it. I'm just watching it because they're a musician. They're rapping about what they're having fun. That's me. But why do I have? Hold on. It's summertime in New York. People don't know how to act. When the sun is out, you only got 3 months. So they just take up every single hour of the day. So, excuse me, I have to take up to talk louder. But anywho, like I'm so quick to amp up Megan Thee Stallion and Cardi B, but why do I cringe when I see the similar kind of content on an anime? What does that say about me and where I police sexuality? And I think that's where I'm interested. And I think that's why I want to challenge people when they watch anything really. And I think it's a matter of how you view something. Kind of like I don't want to say this because I'm gonna get in trouble, but I just think that you kind of have to practice selectivism in anything, even within your own community. Let's be honest, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. So you have to be selective about how you take in stuff, you know, not taking everything personally, not taking things with a grain of salt. Be selective of what you put your energy into. Be selective of the people you're around. Be selective of the kind of opportunities you know. Life is about making decisions, and I think you make the choice however you want to consume something. But all I think would ask is a motorcycle. Hold on. All I ask is for at least take the opportunity to try something different. Try a new food, try a new drink, watch an anime, do something and make yourself uncomfortable. Because I know for me, and actually don't go extreme, like we talk about the whole drug addiction example, like take doses, like do a little here and there, read a book that you would probably hate. And I'm not saying like, you know, read some white supremacist shit like that. No, I hate people do, oh, you need to talk to someone who's different from you. Shut up. No. It's taking these small steps, like trying a new food, going to a different place, going on, like doing something that makes you slightly uncomfortable, and learning and reflecting on that. Again, it doesn't have to be so binary and extreme. I think like I love queerness because it's everything is like in between, interconnected, but also not at the same time. I think that's what anime teaches you, because you literally have an anime where it's even thinking about girl, you know I can pronounce it, Yaxi.
Oh, Yasuke.
Girl. Anywho, like even like thinking about that series that just came out, it's like they hinted at it when the lord, the samurai lord, he was like gay and messing with the boy.
Oh yeah.
You know, and they were hinting at it, you know, but they were trying to be subtle with it, but it was obvious. I don't know, I'm probably assuming things, I guess. Like that kind of subtlety happens often in an anime, and I think that it's interesting as someone who's from the United States, where we're considered to be the most liberated and the most like freeing. We got the Cardi B's and the Megans in here, but something like that is like, oh shoot, like what is this? What is this? You know what I'm saying? So I think it's just interesting to have different type of perspectives interweave how I process desire, process my shame. And I'm trying to say like, and I'm not trying to say like get rid of shame either. Like shame is gonna be there. Like get over it. Like I think of Big Mouth, the shame
yeah,
is.
yeah.
Like it's gonna be there. And I think it's a matter of you managing it, like you managing anxiety. It ain't no different. So
Right. Going off that, that made me think of this book I read. It's called Glitch Feminism. It's about basically how the internet, the digital sphere, is used to attack the patriarchy, basically to question the patriarchy and to queer everything. And I think that anime is a very perfect example of like how the digital sphere is being used to really question these standards that we're living in, or these perceptions that we have of people and things and expectations, because they really do Beastars really was a whole experience. It was earth shattering to me because I was just like, oh my God, I'm watching furries, you know, and in and of itself, it required me to just take a step back and reflect on me, my own self, my own, what I wanted to consume, um, what that meant about me, and then also like what that might potentially mean for the people who created, you know, Beastars and this digital media that I'm consuming. And like that's the case for just everything, you know, even what we consume on Instagram, like you're consuming somebody else's presentation of their sexuality. What does that mean for you? You know, when you're liking Megan Thee Stallion's pic, what does that mean that you're liking her pic and that's how she's presenting her sexuality? She's presenting her boobs, she's presenting her ass. What does that mean for you? And that's really how we engage with everything. I don't think we really see that or come across that until it's something that ejects like these really strong emotions, particularly shame, because like now we're really like, oh shit, what am I consuming right now? But all the time you're consuming something. And you know, especially in America, you're always consuming sex. Like that is always there. You don't question it as much when it's the norm of what sex is usually given to you, you know, if it's usually women like that. But in the same aspect, like when what's his name, Lil Nas X, did Call Me by Your Name, everybody was like, what the fuck am I consuming right now? When literally, like, when it's not presented as queer, you're fine with it. You know what I mean? There are many times where we see Satan, fucking the show Lucifer is all about Satan, and nobody has had any problems, but it's a more heteronormative like view of, you know, using Lucifer. So I don't understand why y'all are coming at my boy about him having Satan. I ain't hear nobody uproaring about why is there a whole show called Lucifer. I hear nothing. There's nobody chatting. So yeah, I think that you only really experience that questioning of what we're consuming when it's something different, when it's something that's challenging to the norm, when it's something that feels shameful. And that's something that Beastars definitely did bring up for me, was like, oh shit, like this feels shameful, but also like, why do I not constantly have this thinking of what am I consuming and what does this mean for me whenever I'm looking at something? Like why is it just now in this moment?
There's that. And I think on a tip, shame exists. There's people who are going to shame you for doing choices you make. And you just have to try your best. It's going to be hard. You're going to cry a couple times. So do you, please don't harm people in the process, though. I would hope that's logical, but I guess not. Explore your sexuality, if you need to. Like, just figure it out. And obviously, don't harm people or anything or animals in the process. And I just hope that there's no shame moving forward. I think that's it. So, yeah.
Yay.